Hi, I'm Femi. Okay, today on the stream, we take a look at the presidential campaign in Iran. How are the candidates doing? Behind me, you can see scenes from the most recent presidential debate. That's debate number 2. What are the big issues the candidates are trying to tackle ahead of the June the 18th election? That is our show today. If you'd like to be part of that show, you can jump into the comment section, ask our guests a question, and hopefully they'll be able to answer it. Be part of today's show. Joining our conversation, we have Mazia, Soraya and Asal. Nice to have all three of you on board. Mazia, please introduce yourself. Tell our audience who you are and what you do.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Mazia Motamedi, and I'm Iran correspondent for Al Jazeera English based in Tehran.
Soraya, welcome to the stream. Introduce yourself.
I'm Soraya Leni, an author, investigative journalist and analyst.
Great to have you. Asal, welcome to the stream. Introduce yourself to our international audience.
Thank you. My name is Asal Rad. I'm a senior research fellow at the National Iranian American Council, which is based in Washington, D.C.
All right, so let us start, Mazia, with a quick cheat, a quick look at who 7 candidates are who are going to be vying for the title of president. Here on my laptop, I have all 7 of them. One line for each candidate. Let's start here at the top.
Sure. Amir Hossein Qazizadeh Hashemi is a lawmaker. He used to be deputy parliament speaker up until a couple of weeks ago, but he's now a member of parliament. Ebrahim Raisi is the frontrunner. He is the head of the judiciary at the moment. And Mohsen Rezai used to be the commander-in-chief of the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and is now the secretary of the Expediency Council. And Mohsen Mehralizadeh is a reformist. He used to be vice president under President Khatami and governors of 2 provinces. Abdul Nasser Hemmati used to be the governor of the Central Bank of Iran until a few weeks ago when he was dismissed for running for president. Ayreza Zakani is also a lawmaker, a conservative hardliner. He is the head of the research center of the parliament. And Saeed Janili is a former nuclear negotiator and a senior security official in Iran.
Thank you, Mazia, for keeping us up to date with who is who. Soraya, when you look at that lineup, what does that tell you about Iran today?
I think it doesn't say much about Iran today. I think that says quite a lot about the Guardian Council today and the lack of representative politics that the Guardian Council has taken, particularly since parliamentary elections last year, in disqualifying so many reformist and well-known candidates, not just reformists, including, for example, Ali Mortahari, who is a pragmatic politician, but also, of course, in this presidential election as well. I think they've carried over that legacy and that point of view, I guess, towards excluding a lot of avenues of conversation and opinions from elected bodies in the country.
Asa, I want you to listen to some people on the street interviews talking about the candidate selection and then come off the back of their thoughts with your thoughts about the candidates. Let's have a listen.
The competition should have been more open and there should have been a broader selection of candidates. The names that we see approved now are the same people we have seen repeatedly over the last few years, and they have come and gone.
The majority of people had already made their mind before this. But this decision to disqualify candidates, more than anything, turned the election into an appointment. It used to be disguised, but it's not even disguised anymore.
I think that speaks directly to what you're hearing across the board in Iran, precisely the fact that even before the disqualifications, there was not a lot of energy behind this particular election. And in Iran, since the revolution, there's been historically good turnout, like very high turnout. 70% of voters will turn out for elections. And when there's low turnout, you tend to get more conservative candidates that are winning, and when there's high turnout, you tend to get the reformists who win. So in this particular case, Mustafa Tajzadeh, who is a disqualified, well-known reformist, said actually in a certain way, it's like they're undermining, the Guardian Council has undermined the entire idea of the republic behind the Islamic Republic.
I'm just looking at one of Mazia's headlines. Iran's Guardian Council disqualifies most presidential hopefuls. When you said most there in your headline, Mazia, how many people were disqualified? It's a huge number, right?
It is. 585 people, if I'm not wrong, were disqualified and only 7 were allowed to run.
So this was I'm going to say this is probably the first controversy of this presidential election campaign. Has it resolved itself? Are people just, it happens?
It's difficult. On one hand, even some conservatives and hardliners have criticized this decision by the Guardian Council, the vetting body, to disqualify a lot of people. Even some top people like Ali Rijani, who is an advisor to the Supreme Leader and a former 3-time Parliament Speaker, and a group of other reformists and moderates, to the point that right now it's 5 conservative and hardliners against 2 moderates or /reformists. They're really not. There are no prominent reformists left in this race. So people are not happy. People are disappointed. There's a general air of apathy toward this election, but it moves on, I guess.
I'm just going to, yeah, Hassan, go ahead. You go first.
I was just going to add to Maziar's, because he mentioned, and this is true, that even Raisi himself, I mean, Raisi is seen as the front runner now, right? Like when they say it's an appointment, they mean that it seems like Raisi is the one who's being appointed. But even Raisi is criticized to a certain extent, saying, he wants it to be more competitive, he wants it to be more participatory. And while the Supreme Leader, Khamenei, originally was fine with the Guardian Council's disqualification process, he even walked it back a little bit, saying some of the candidates had been wrong. But what's interesting is that ultimately Khamenei has the power to reverse it if he wants. So is it more rhetorical that they're just using this because they're reacting to the backlash, or are they genuinely concerned for what the Guardian Council did? I would say it's more rhetorical.
Soraya, what do you think?
I think that's a poisoned chalice in many ways, because as we've seen previously with candidates like Mustafa Moin back in the Khatami days, where the Supreme Leader intervened, overturned an election ban when it comes to reformists, for example, it ends up being a poisoned chalice, because a lot of their premise is actually there shouldn't be such interference from the state. It should be elected bodies, representative bodies that are making these decisions, not these centres of power. So when a centre of power does actually intervene, it really does undermine their position and legitimacy.
So we have 3 debates. We've had debate number 1, debate number 2 has just happened. Debate number 3 is happening on Saturday. I want to go back to the first debate, because that's where you began to see what the candidates are standing for. Let's have a listen to 3 of them.
I'm running because this is what people ask me to do. Different classes of people have started shouting about inefficiencies, cruelty, poverty, discrimination and corruption.
Many people think the result of the election is already decided, but we can change the scene and the results. What I want you to do, and what you are capable of doing, is to vote. Even if you want to complain about the current situation, do it through voting for me.
How do you want to run the country? Mr. Hemati, your governance was catastrophic. You are sitting here as a representative of Mr. Rouhani.
So what issues there are you listening out for intently?
Well, what you're hearing in the debates is the conservatives basically piling on to Hemati, which is the one lone, not that there's 2, there's Merhalizadeh, who's a reformist, and Hemati, who was the governor of the central bank, who is an economist and more of a moderate. And they're really piling up on Hemati because he is gaining some traction. One of the things I would keep in mind in talking about the elections in Iran is they're not entirely predictable. Yes, Raisi is certainly a front runner, but we can't predict what will actually happen, especially if some candidates like Hemati can gain traction, and if the other conservative candidates don't remove themselves and fall behind Raisi, then you're going to see some of his vote be split as well. But the idea is that central in all the things that they're saying is the economy is very important, and who's going to be the leader that can take Iran out of the situation that it's in right now, which is a devastated economy.
When you talk about the economy being so important, we wanted to add into this conversation some perspectives from Tehran and how people are doing as far as resources are concerned, shopping and groceries are concerned. Have a listen.
You see the situation. Everything has become more expensive. Rent, food, chicken, meat. Everything has become more expensive. We are renters and we have no income. So who should we vote for? Who can we trust?
Elections are the pinnacle of democracy, and we have also participated. But what has been the result, especially in the economic field? Today there are 2 or 3 unemployed people in every household.
Mazia, can you give us a few examples of what it means for the economy to be a major issue in Iran? Make it personal.
I think the main issue is definitely inflation. You could literally go to the supermarket every week and notice that the price of something or multiple things have gone up, and you would often find yourself thinking, I bought this thing for this much 6 months ago, now it's triple that. So it's not necessarily about shortages. There are sporadic shortages too, but it's mostly the price. And obviously incomes are not rising as much, and there's high unemployment. So all of this contributes to this general air of apathy and disappointment, because this can only go on for so long, and people will need to see some improvement.
And of course, economically, the inflation has to be tied to where sanctions are right now in Iran. So if we then connect that to the United States and what might happen with the nuclear deal, what is the US doing right now, Asal, watching these upcoming presidential elections? What are they doing? Are they negotiating right now with Iran?
The U.S. is negotiating with Iran right now, but keep in mind that President Biden came into a situation where the Trump administration's maximum pressure policy was in full effect, and with all intents and purposes, it is still in full effect. Not one sanction has been lifted, despite the fact that we're in negotiations with Iran right now in terms of the nuclear deal. That has an impact on the election as well. Had the Biden administration approached it differently from the very beginning, had they approached it the way that they did things like the Paris Climate Accord or the Muslim ban, and taken immediate steps into returning to the deal, which I think a lot of his supporters expected him to do, then you might find a different situation. If some sanctions had been lifted and Iranians experienced the idea of economic relief, then maybe there would be some enthusiasm for voting, and it could change the sort of political environment that you see in Iran today. But this is the path that the Biden administration has taken. And something to keep in mind is Iranians are not naive to the fact that, yes, they're very aware of their domestic mismanagement and corruption that leads to these economic situations, but they're also very aware of the role of sanctions. And when I speak to family and friends in Iran, they say it's like the war in the 1980s. I mean, that is a very different situation than it was just a few years ago. And so the role of U.S. sanctions can't be denied.
Sure. Soraya, I'm just really curious about when Rouhani started his presidency 4 years ago and how he's ending his presidency 4 years ago. What is your takeaway?
Well, 8 years ago, 2013,
8 years ago, excuse me.
when he was elected in this wave of optimism and hope. It was the administration of moderation and hope. That's what all of the posters said. That's what everybody believed. And it's very difficult now to describe just how excited people were in 2013, coming after that 8-year period of Ahmadinejad, the Bush administration as well, part of that in the United States. So it was a very dark period of time. And I can say that what is happening now, 8 years later, unfortunately, it really is back to the future, where there's been almost a full circle, where they've gone through those dark days. It looked very much like, war was on the horizon. There were, under the Obama administration, heavy sanctions as well. And then, of course, there was the JCPOA. And once again, that renewed optimism and hope. And, that Rouhani could change something, that he was changing something in signing that accord. And then 8 years later, we're effectively back to the beginning. So, unfortunately for the people of Iran, I think these past 8 years have really just been a waste of time.
Soraya, I want to put this point to you. This comes from Amin. Amin is a project researcher at the University of Tehran. He has a theory about why conservatives are now in favour and moderates are not in favour. You don't have to agree with it, but I'm really interested about your take. Let's have a listen to Amin first of all.
I believe disappearance of the so-called moderates from Iran's politics would be one of the most important results of the upcoming presidential election in Iran. The decision of Guardian Council showed that the Islamic Republic doesn't need reformists or moderates for its future. They failed to fulfill the demands of the Islamic Republic in the nuclear deal, and currently, due to the eagerness of the Joe Biden administration to rejoin the JCPOA, Tehran believes without moderates can gain more concessions from the US.
Basically, moderates had their chance. They had 8 years. Look where we are. This is why Conservatives are going to do well.
No, I absolutely, I disagree with that mostly. Because, yes, moderates had their chance, but for the past 8 years, hardliners have spent that time undermining the Rouhani administration, putting obstacles in his way and trying to prevent the administration from carrying out its promises. Hardliners, for the most part, were in opposition to the JCPOA, including when, it was ratified through the parliament. You had parliamentarians, hardline parliamentarians, some of them actually crying. They were that upset about this. And it's not just that. They've undermined his demands for reform, for moderation, for other sorts of, important issues that he campaigned on in not just 2013, but of course 2017. And yes, fine, moderates have had a chance. So there is this internal problem within Iran and this internal opposition, which is important and it cannot be discounted. But then you have on the alternative side, you can look at the past, 20 years of Iranian presidential elections. They've elected a populist, they've elected a hardliner, a reformist, a moderate, a pragmatist. But the United States, on the other hand, the US position in Washington towards Iran has changed in a very limited way. So I think that part of the problem is that the shift in Washington hasn't happened towards Iran to allow the changed atmosphere within Iran to really take hold.
I have some questions on YouTube for you. Asal, go ahead quickly, but I also want the audience to be able to talk to you. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think Soraya brought up a very, very important point, which is, commentators and analysts in the U.S., looking at it from the U.S. perspective, have been saying for years that maximum pressure would have this exact consequence in Iran, that it would move Iran's domestic politics to the right. And so the external, we can't, separate the fact that there are external factors that are influencing Iranian politics as well.
I am going to put some thoughts to you from our audience who are watching right now. I want instant reactions, very quick thoughts back. Farshid says, could the lifting of sanctions in the final moments of election day change the situation in favour of Hemati? Impossible question to answer for Asal. Have a go.
Sure. I think, again, elections are unpredictable everywhere, and I would argue especially in Iran. So it is possible. I would say that it is unlikely to happen because, one, I think sanctions being lifted in the next 10 days is unlikely to happen. And so it's unlikely to have that effect.
Soraya, Jay Noon says, is there a chance for Iran to become a more liberal country?
How? That's my answer to that one. I think at the current point in Iran, with inflation so high, unemployment so high, and economic issues that have really taken over in terms of people's priorities, I think it's incredibly difficult for people to push for reform when they're struggling to put food on the table, when they're struggling to buy medicines. I think that's the fundamental problem at the moment.
Mazia, Aya says that we're not going to vote. There's a whole social media hashtag around that idea of what is the point? We're not going to vote. Mazia, tell us more about that.
Well, yeah, I understand that with the current situation, the economy and other restrictions on freedoms, on internet freedoms, on freedom of speech, and you don't see any viable option out of the situation. And in this election, I feel like many people see that their vote is not going to have a huge impact. As you said, it's very unlikely that Hemati, for instance, is going to just come around and be able to win and then go ahead to implement very wide-reaching reforms that would just fix the economy and everything. And I think on the nuclear deal, also, it's important to make the distinction that at least right now, it's become state policy. I think it's always been state policy, but especially in the past few months, President Rouhani has also been trying to make a point to say that every step has been going on in direct consultation with the Supreme Leader and the Supreme National Security Council, which is also comprised of hardliners and conservatives. So I think the nuclear deal is not going to have a huge impact on the election, and in turn, the election is not going to have a huge impact on the nuclear deal.
Audience, I want to show you this, and this is a recent telephone poll. So have a look here on my laptop on Twitter. I'm just going to scoot up here. So we're using the translation from Persian. The elections in June, about 36% of people are expected to turn out. That is not a good turnout. And there's not seemingly an awful lot of enthusiasm for going to vote, which by itself, is a vote, right? Not voting is a vote if you're not enthusiastic about it. But Setere had this thought. Let me just share this with you, because somehow she has been excited and captivated by the debates. We're on debate number 2. This is Setere's thoughts. Let's have a listen.
Even though the initial public opinion poll suggested that we're going to witness a very low turnout in this presidential elections, it seems that after the candidates were announced and they started their presidential campaigns, and particularly after we had the first televised presidential debates, more and more people are talking about the election, and especially online. And there's a stronger election vibe than before in the society.
Asa, I'm just wondering, is there anything in this current election that is making you excited?
Not particularly. I mean, I'm the wrong person to ask in terms of like my excitement behind the election. But from what I'm getting from people who are in Iran, no, I think there was a lack of energy going into it, but the disqualifications was sort of the nail in the coffin. I mean, there is the possibility, as Satara was pointing to, that you'll see higher numbers than what is being predicted. But overall, compared to 70% turnout in 2017, I don't think we're going to see anything close to those numbers.
Soraya.
I think Asal is completely right. I don't think voter turnout's going to be anything that we saw during, Rouhani's first election, 2013, 2017, for example. But I will say that even in 2013, there was a lot of apathy. As I said, the environment back then, at the end of the Ahmadinejad years, was very similar to the environment right now. And so there was a huge movement of boycotting the vote at that time as well. And a lot of the opinion polls showed some very low figures, not as low as 30-odd%, I will, of course, point out. But it wasn't until probably 3 days before the election, 72 hours before the election, that the Rouhani administration, or then campaign, actually gathered steam and gathered this kind of momentum that really exhilarated people enough to decide, well, actually, I might go and vote. And that's what happened. It was only 72 hours out. So, I think there's still a little bit of time, of course, for optimism, but I think Asal might be right in that.
Mazia.
If I may, I think you're right, but the last time the debates themselves were very lively, they really had an impact. This time, there's been 2 debates so far. There's just one left on Saturday. And they've been very, very bland, just nothing really exciting, nothing to get people going. It's just been kind of entertaining, perhaps, the candidates trading barbs, just attacking each other. So it's not very constructive. It's not many plans and details are being hashed out in the debates. And they can't even be called debates, perhaps, because there's zero moderation involved and everything is random, and they just ask questions, random questions from random candidates.
Feels like it could be a job for the stream. Mazia, Soraya and Asal, thank you so much for unpacking the presidential campaign upcoming right now for the upcoming elections on June the 18th in Iran. Thank you, YouTubers, for your comments and questions. I will see you next time. Take care, everybody.